So our program tonight is sponsored by one of our board members, and this is a community museum. We have a lot of involvement from people, probably your neighbors or people who taught your children, and we invite everyone to be more involved. Steve earned his bachelor's degree in journalism at the University of Maryland and went on to be the North American sports editor for Writers for 30 years. 30 years. Steve has written about many controversial and important topics in the sports world, including NFL concussion testing, which continues to be an issue, DraftKings employees, potentially sports betting. Steve's profession in sports journalism was marked by his passion to get those important stories through to thousands of broadcasters and newspapers. Mark Goldman, who was not the valedictorian of the class, but he was close, chose to take over the other side of sports journalism, photography. Mark is self-taught. And photojournalism was not your first career, right? We'll hear about that maybe? His photos have been published widely in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Time Magazine, Good Morning America. I wish your mom was here. She'd be very proud of all this. So they worked out their program, and we will have some time for some questions. I do want to thank you all for joining us tonight and encourage you to come back. We have these every month, thanks to the 6-year support of our benefactor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speakers.
Okay, once again, my name's Steve Ginsburg. I just want to let you know what a wire service is. A lot of people don't know. It's basically for stories around the country or the world where a paper or a broadcaster does not have a staffer. In other words, I'm pretty anonymous in this area, but for each of the stories I've done, I get bylines in literally thousands of newspapers around the world. But because mostly of what I cover is right here, the Washington Post or the Baltimore Sun, they send their own people to it. But the hard part about a wire service is there's a deadline every minute. I mean, we might say, you know, for the Washington Post, it might be 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. But when you're writing for the world, you've got to keep in mind that there's a deadline in Sri Lanka. And they want to know when that Super Bowl ends. They need the story. So my stories, when I'm doing a game story, literally has to be done at the final buzzer or whistle. I mean, when the game is over, I hit the button and 500 words are gone because I have to assume that there's the credo in the wire service is there's a deadline every minute. So whether I'm giving the story to broadcasters, which need to say the Packers won the Super Bowl, okay, or yeah, you know, they need to know that. They need to know it quickly. So I had a whole head of hair when I started in this business, but wire service will do that to you. Who gets a wire service? It's papers from around the country getting stories that they don't send staffers to. It's not just sports, it's news. If there's a shooting in El Paso, the Washington Post will use a wire story. They'll use the Reuters story, they'll use the AP story, the UPI story, because they're not there. They might be there the next day, but when a story's breaking of a mass shooting, a tragedy like that, then they need the wire copy. So that's basically what a wire service does. I'll tell you a little bit more, and I'll let you know right now what Mark does.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And nice to see some friends here as well. So similar to Steve, I also have deadlines. A little bit different than Steve. We were talking about this before. Which is a major event happens, because I'm also shooting for The Wire mostly, and lots of other media outlets. Basically, when my pictures go out, it's incumbent upon me to be able to capture basically the story of whatever the athletic event is. Mainly, I shoot sports about 95% of the time. So it's very important, and it's important for me to marry the imagery to what he's writing about, right? I mean, because it would be silly to have a photo of something that's a totally different angle than what, for instance, Steve has written about. And so I think about that a lot. Like, how can I accurately tell the story? So what you see in this room and down the hallway are some images, mostly from like about the last year and a half, of key moments in games that tell the stories. And so I think that's pretty much what, from my standpoint, what I do. I've been, now, you had mentioned, I actually didn't start as a photojournalist. And so we can talk about that as far as career decisions. Is it okay if I do career?
Sure.
Okay. So career decisions. So I became a photojournalist when I was 40-something. I had never taken a photo course in my life, ever. And the reason it happened is I was actually playing basketball with my sons in the driveway, and we were not getting along particularly well. We were teenage boys. I have 2 teenage boys, so we weren't. So I decided for Christmas break I would take my oldest son, who was a huge baseball fan, to spring training. And so I dusted off an old camera that I had inherited from my dad, who had passed away, and brought down I think 4 rolls of film. And so the first day we were there, I was very, very close to Oral Hershiser talking to Mike Piazza, 2 famous baseball players. And they were having a conversation, and Oral was telling Mike Piazza, hey, if you give me a sign, but I don't shake you off, I like the pitch, but I don't like the location. So if I rub my right leg, I want you to move the pitch inside. If I tug, if I go to the back of my head, I want you to move the pitch outside. And he was basically saying how, and Piazza's like, so I took some pictures of this. So I gave the film to my son, and I wasn't a journalist or anything like that. He came back. I said, go to Walmart, get 2 prints made. That way you can give one to the player. He loved getting autographs, and you can get an autograph in the other one. And he came back, and he comes back to the hotel room. He started to look through, and he goes, damn, Dad, these are pretty good. You should be a sports photographer. And I thought, maybe I should be. And that's literally how I got started. So I've never had formal training. Sort of the way I look at it is the device I'm using, the cameras I'm using, are essentially computers with lenses on them, essentially. So understanding the technology that's available to you, what it's capable of doing, and then being able to push that technology to do something different and be able to look at something different is something that I think about quite a bit. So you want to talk about how you became a...
Well, unlike Mark, I decided early that I was going to be a sports writer. True story, 6th grade, I look in the mirror and I go, I am not going to be big enough to be middle linebacker for the New York Giants. I got to do something. So I thought about it. I literally thought about it. I said, you know what? I'm going to write about them. I'll get to know the players. I'll get to go into all these games for free. I'll even get paid for going to these games. So I said, that's what I'm going to do. So I wrote, this was in the 6th grade, so I wrote for my junior high paper, wrote for my high school paper, wrote for the county paper, wrote for the Washington Star, wrote for United Press International, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I covered my commencement speech at Maryland for United Press International and was hired the next day. So that shows how far back. I said I'm going to do this, and that's what I always told my kids, that you have to choose early, choose your passion, and you can do it. The nice thing about a wire service is, unlike a newspaper, see the Washington Post, if you're the baseball writer, you've got the baseball beat and it's great and you're loving it, but it kind of ends at the World Series. If you're a wire service guy and you're on the sports team, they don't have nearly as many people as a major newspaper. So I would go to the World Series, I'd go to the Super Bowl, I'd go to the Olympics, I'd go to the U.S. Open tennis, U.S. Open golf. It was a dream. So that's the big advantage of being with a wire service, is that you get to go to everything. Ironically, when I decided to become a sports writer, my brother I was in the 6th grade. He was 3 years older, and he said, good idea. I'm going to do that too. So unfortunately, everyone thinks that, you're following your brother's footsteps. No, he's following in mine. Just want to set the record straight here. But it was interesting that my brother and I both write, or at least I wrote for a wire service for 30 years, or 40 years if you count UPI before Reuters. And he writes for AP. He's written his whole career. So we have been competing for 30 to 40 years against each other. We've been at the Super Bowl literally sitting next to each other competing. So it's been a different perspective. But what's been nice about that is, for a wire service, guy hits a jump shot at the end of a game. Okay, is it 32 feet? Is it 36 feet? It's not uncommon for wire services to have different takes on how long the shot was, how long the putt was. What was nice working with my brother, I could just look over and go 38 feet. Yeah, okay, 38 feet. So at least the wire services would be legitimately have the same distance, because if it wasn't my brother and I, there'd be two different lengths on the putt. The nice thing about a wire service is you can branch out just a little from sports. When I've been in news at Reuters and UPI, and it's just been I've covered some phenomenal things. I've done plane crashes. I've done train crashes. I've flown with the Blue Angels. When you're not on a newspaper, you can go to your boss and go, Blue Angels just asked me to fly. Can I go with them and write a story on it? And they're like, yeah. And that got really good play. So there's a lot of different things. I love entertainment writing. I've interviewed James Earl Jones, Judd Hirsch, done a lot of cool things in the entertainment world. So as a Reuters employee, you can branch out a little bit. Sports was for the last 25 years was my thing, but always on the side, I could always do something else, and it was very interesting and very fun.
So for me, I also get to cover a wide range of events. It's a little bit different in that what a lot of people don't understand or realize, for me to shoot a professional athletic event like a baseball game or a hockey game, that's credentialed through the leagues, and the leagues through the teams specifically. So for me to shoot, like I shot the Caps game last night, so I have what's called a season credential with the Washington Capitals, but that goes through the actual Capitals organization, and the Capitals organization goes to the league, the NHL. Because if I were to do something that was monetarily damaging, how about that? That's pretty fair, right? Monetarily damaging to the leagues, they would pull my credential. And so it's very, very tightly. It's a very tightly regulated little niche area, and it's that way for every single professional sport. And one of the things that is sort of interesting or difficult for me is that my imagery, basically, I'm pretty much prohibited from selling it, except for the stuff that's in here, which I am selling. But it's fairly well regulated, because the leagues want a piece of that action. I mean, they want to own. You see Major League Baseball, you'll see that it's MLB certified and stuff like that. That's because they have got that image, and they want a piece of that, whatever that action is. So it makes it a little bit different for me, in that I don't get to so much pick and choose what it is I want to do. I have to be assigned to specific events or have a relationship with the team in order to be able to cover whatever those events are. And depending on where they are in the process, I might be with that team all the way through until a certain point when the league then just takes over and takes it out of the team control. So, for example, I shot the Ravens playoff game last weekend, right? I think Saturday. Yeah. Okay. So I shot that. I probably, if they would have won and gone to the championship, would have gotten that Super Bowl. No way. The league takes that over. There's no way. I mean, I already know I would never get a credential for that. So it's a little bit different than what Steve does, in that he has a little bit more freedom to do what he likes. I don't get so much to pick and choose the events I cover. And the other thing, Steve and I were talking about this before. it is a very small cadre of people that do what I do and what he does. I mean, honestly, it's the community of professional photographers that do what I do, and professional writers that are wire guys that work with Steve. We all know each other, and so when he's talking about his brother, like looking over his brother, it is co-opetition. I mean, honestly, I'm very supportive and very friendly to other guys I'm competing with, because I like to see them do well, and I want to be a good guy. I want to be, I want to be friendly. I don't want to like throw them under the bus. But by the same token, I'm working my butt off to make a better image and to get something out faster than they do. In a heartbeat, I'm always doing that. By the way, with this discussion too, Steve and I were talking about this. We absolutely want this to be interactive. So at any point in time, if you have a question, just shout it out, raise your hand, do whatever, and we'll be happy to take it on. Do you want to talk about a little bit about some of the athletes?
Yeah, sure. So when I first got into this, yes.
So when you were with the Blue Angels, did you get all the roles?
Yes, I did. It was about 25 minutes, and it was so ridiculously intense. By the time he said, "Okay, we're going back to Andrews," I went, "Thank God," because I was about to yak. We went up so quickly. I think we pulled 9 Gs, and he apologized because I was like, and then he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." But we did barrel rolls, we did inverted. It was, and he comes out. He was a former cornerback for University of Colorado, a football player, and he was just so cool. He was, and I'm just coming out literally sweating to death, ready to retch. But it was phenomenal. It was just something that clearly never forget. So anyway, when I first started going into the locker rooms, I was young in my early 20s, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to see Don Mattingly, my favorite player, Donnie Baseball. So I and I legitimately wanted to get a quote after the game, and he was, "Hey Don," I said, "Hey Don, got a second?" He went, "No, not talking." I'm going, "Oh man, Don, man, I love you." I'm thinking this, of course, but it's always, that's what you get after a game. Sometimes these guys are phenomenal. Sometimes they're not talking. You get Mattingly. So I've been yelled at by some of the best. And I'll tell you, after a game, a lot of people don't realize this. When you see a news conference after a game, the coach comes in there like he's just lost by 50. He needed the win. So he sits at the podium and goes, he's daring you to ask a question because he's going to jump over the podium to knock your head off. Because a lot of times they will, after the scowl, they will sit there for 10 seconds and go, "Okay, no questions, I'm out of here." And they walk off. And that's what they want. So invariably, I'm the pigeon, I'm the guy who just, like he gives the scowl, whether it's Greg Popovich or Bobby Knight. I mean, they know what they're doing. They just lost a big one. They don't want to talk, but they are forced to talk by the league. So they get, they give the scowl, and invariably I'm going, "Oh, please, someone say something," because you need the quote. Okay, so invariably no one's talking. I raise my hand because, fortunately I don't cover these guys on a daily basis. They don't really know who I am until I say Steve Ginsburg, Reuters, and it's usually on CNN by that time. But anyway, I go up there and I don't want to ask it about the 2-3 defense. I mean, I need the overall, the heartbreak question. So I'll ask these guys like, what did you think? It sounds bad, but you need the overall question. So, how heartbreaking is it to go down 15-0 to start the game and lose by 30? And by that time, they're jumping over. They've been jumping over the podium. They've cursed at me. But invariably they go, "We couldn't have beaten a high school team tonight. It was the worst thing I've seen, and I've been coaching for 50 years. And everyone's like writing like, "Oh, thank you, Gins, for getting this quote," because that's going to be in every newspaper in the Western Hemisphere after the game. But no one was going to say that. So, but I had to not only say the question, because a lot of people look at the TV and go, "Boy, that was a juvenile question. You just lost by 30. What do you think?" But you need that raw emotion. You need that overall encompassing picture, and that would be the lead quote in every newspaper in the world the next day. That we couldn't have beaten a high school team. It's the worst game I've ever seen in 47 years of coaching. That's what you get, the raw emotion. I know somebody who was covering the Orioles, and one of their players took a bat in spring training and like trashed the clubhouse. So after the game, the player told the press, "No one write about it." So this guy said, I got to write about it. So he wrote about it, and for half a season, when this player. When this person came up, this player stopped talking, whether he was in the middle of talking with 12 people or not. So these are the things that, it's not all great. To talk about half the season before the Orioles said, look, you got to talk to him. You got to talk to everyone. And if he shows up during the scrum, you can't just shut up and walk away. So, it took about half a season for this to come, for it to be worked out. But what I'm trying to say is it's not all, get the quotes after the game, because it's, a lot of these people are just, they're mad that they lost, or some of them are just, just wonderful people after all. But, it's a job to get the quotes. It's not just you walk up to them and hear their life story. So that's just a little insight about some of the things that we have trouble with. Yes. Well, sport covering most, I just love all sports. And I always said that the sport I love covering most is the last one I did, because I'll do U.S. Open tennis. I go, God, I love this. There's nothing is better than sitting down with Rafa Nadal. This is just great. And then by then the Super Bowl comes, and it's just wonderful. So I can't, and I'll get back in a little later about some of the players. There are generalizations to make about which players are the best quotes and which of them don't want to see you. So I'll get to that in just a bit. But as far as the sports myself, it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Just wondering if you're writing anything about the current Houston Astros.
Well, no, actually, since I am retired now, it's just, I'll be running quotes for people every so often. Like the San Jose Mercury will say, the A's are coming in for a 3-game series. Can you write that? Or the Seattle Times, the Mariners are coming in. But no, since I am retired, I wouldn't do the heavy story like that. But that was my thing. I would have been all over that.
So for me, similar to Steve, right? Players are oftentimes very vulnerable, right? And so one of the things that I try to do is I want to be able to show, and in fact, you can call it we call it the jube shot, right? You win the jube, or the with the loser, down, something like that. So players are very different when it comes to that. And I always try, this is just my own personal policy, is I always try to be really respectful and courteous of their space and their time, because I really truly understand that I'm sort of like impinging on in their environment. I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not part of the team. I don't want to be part of the team. In fact, Steve and I were talking about this before. I don't have, and it's very difficult for me, and people have trouble understanding this. I was telling this to Steve before. I'm not like a particular fan. I'm not even a big sports fan, which is kind of antithetical to my job, right? You would think I'd be like a huge sports fan. But it was pointed out by actually a Reuters photographer when I first started out a long time ago, who said, you cannot do this job and be a fan. And that, in fact, is true, because I have lots and lots and lots of pictures of something really important happening. And the photographer's like standing in the end zone, right? Big pass right in front of the guy, and photographer's there like this. Right? Camera's down at their waist, and their mouth is just wide open, right? And so that guy clearly did not get the photo. And so my goal is, if you ever see me, I never want you to see my face. Right, my goal is always have a camera up and and be working it and try to look for different things.
You mentioned that certain leagues are more difficult to get. What would you describe as like the most difficult, like consistently to get photos for? Like I know like the DC Spirit, they're like top.
Okay. So I will say this is a very high level generalization. Hockey is the hardest sport to shoot when you're on the ice because it's so fast. I mean, it is. When a guy hits a slap shot, it's going over 100 miles an hour, and it's so fast and really fast. You really have to, really have to pay attention. So that's from that sort of stand. And I don't know if that's the genesis of your question. That's like the hardest sport to shoot. I mean, the fastest, the hardest sport for me personally to shoot is baseball, and I love baseball because baseball, you have a huge expanse of field, right? I mean, the thing is just huge, right? 325 feet down that line, 340 feet down that line, 410 feet there. That's a big area to cover. If a guy hits a ball and you're let's say I'm on the batter, I'm trying to get him hitting the ball, and I'm on the batter and he hits a sharp ground ball to the shortstop, even though my nickname is Flash, I ain't that fast. I cannot swing around enough to go to the shortstop, focus, and get it. So I have to I actually pre-position myself a lot of times on plays. For football, you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
So on football, I'm like a defensive back. Literally, I'm watching the quarterback. And I'm particularly really trying to watch the ball. I will say that the Ravens quarterback is really good at hiding the ball. That guy is really, I mean, he's the best I've ever, literally the best I've ever seen. It is impossible. It's almost impossible where he'll actually stick it in and pull it out, and it's just very difficult. But football is hard to capture peak action, and then I would say basketball is by far the easiest. You always know where they're going, right? Gotta go to the hoop. So that sort of limits where you gotta go. And you had a question?
Yeah, there was an iconic photo of Bobby Moore scoring a goal.
He's in the air?
He's flying.
Yeah.
And the story was that the photographer was at the far end of the rink, and his boss told him to get down the other end. And the guy who had that position decided to go get a beer, and he got in that spot. It was at the right spot at the right time and got that shot. What's your luckiest shot?
God, there's so many. No, they're all lucky. I mean, honestly, I really think a lot about trying to position and be in the right place at the right time to capture the image. I have a couple shots that are like my favorites. Like I made a great picture. Remember David Newhan?
Sure.
Right. Okay. So David Newhan was a sort of maybe a middling player would be a good word. He played for the Baltimore Orioles for a number of years. The guy his dad was a baseball writer for the LA Times, right? His dad was Ross. He's actually in the Baseball Hall of Fame. But I made a picture of him it was a broken bat picture where he hit the ball and his bat, I got just at the right exact instant, and which is pure luck because I never actually see him because the shutter trips when the picture's taken. It's black. So I actually don't know until I go back and look. But I had a picture where the bat was literally coming apart and the ball's just like, it's splintering. There's splinters everywhere and the ball's like right in front of the bat. And it ran in Sports Illustrated, ESPN, and Sports Illustrated for Kids in the same week. And that was pretty good.
So how did you get paid?
Oh God! So no. In my case, it's a 2-tier system. So, and that's a really good question. So I get paid for an assignment. So there's a flat rate I get paid for doing an assignment. I go to a Caps game, and my agency's going to say, it's the same rate. Doesn't matter. I get paid for that. Then I have a secondary market. So I actually have an agent. And yeah. Hey, I'm trying to monetize it. And so it goes on what goes on the wire goes on the wire. That's theirs, and they own it. I actually maintain the copyright to all my images. So it goes to a secondary market, and then they go out and market wherever they can go. So I have, right now, the last time I looked, I have like 2.1 million photos on the web altogether.
So if somebody buys that,
Yeah, so what'll happen is if it's sold, and I'm talking about, look, you think, whoa, that's a lot, man. So my last invoice from was pages and pages of pictures that were used on the web that earned me 67 cents an image. Right, so I can go to McDonald's a couple times or something like that. You know, it's not yeah. Does that answer your question?
yes.
Okay, awesome.
How many pictures do you pay to get the one or two?
Well, okay, so I just in general will say it depends on the athletic event, and but like when I do a hockey game, and in fact, one of my favorite assistants is sitting over there, and she helped me out. So what'll happen is in a hockey game, I'll usually run 3 cameras. All right, so my 3 cameras are, I will run a camera with a sort of a mid-zoom kind of lens, so I can capture images that are sort of around the net, and maybe if I have a hole that's an angle, I can capture down ice a little bit. I'll use a fisheye, so when they're like right up against the glass, smushed, I can capture them there. And then I hang remote cameras. You know, is it okay if I talk about remotes? Okay. So I do a ton of remote work. And the reason I do a ton of remote work is in the sort of pecking order of photographers, and there is a distinct pecking order of photographers. When I go to, let's say, a Caps game or whatever, they'll say, okay, AP, what position you want? And the AP will get their pick of there's 6 ice positions. They'll get their pick first. Getty, what position you want? The team photographer will take his position. And so already, you know, so 50% of the holes that are on the ice are already gone. And then it's sort of, you know, they'll take the most desirable positions because hopefully you get the best picture. For me personally, I don't really care where I am. Because, and I don't want this to sound sort of like, hey, look at me. But I'm pretty sure I can make an image no matter where I am. And so to compensate for usually having not a prime position, I hang remote cameras. And for me to do that it's proven to be an interesting exercise. So there's specific gear, but I'm using a regular camera, and with my own cameras, I'm using Nikons. The reason I use Nikons is because I can use really old lenses that were manual focus, and on a remote camera, I don't want to autofocus, right? I'll tape that lens down so it doesn't, the focus doesn't shift at all. And at hockey, typically at the Cap Center, I'll go up on the catwalk. It's 8 stories above the ice, and I'll hang a camera actually over the edge of the catwalk, so it's like pointed down at the goal. And now, to get permission to do that, number one, took a long time, right? You have to be technically competent in what you're doing. And if anything were to fall from there, it would kill somebody, right? If my lens were to come off the camera and fall, it would kill somebody. And if it's up there during the game, that's like, I have to be doubly safe and doubly careful. So I'll do that, and I'm running, these pictures are just running pictures, so you'll see some of the remotes. Basketball, I'll put cameras on the backboard. I'll put them on the side of the backboard. I'll put them up at the top. Sometimes I'll put them in what's called the mouse hole at the very bottom of the basket. There's like a little cutout angled up. Sometimes I'll use what's called the hat cam. The hat cam is literally, I take my hat off my head and I set it on the floor and just angle it up a little bit, set my camera on it, and push it with my finger. So I use a lot of remote cameras to try to get different angles, because the goal of what I'm trying to do, yeah, that's a remote camera. So a lot of times what'll happen is I'll use remotes to just try to get a different angle, because in my business, and a little bit different than what Steve does. If Steve misses, if Steve misses a major event, like a big something happens because he had to use the restroom, right? We're old guys, we have to use the restroom a lot. So if he has to use the restroom and he misses it, he can go back and look at it online and be able to write about it, right? And he can just go back, right? There'll be stuff that he can he can write about. I absolutely cannot afford that luxury. There is no going back for me. If I don't get it, I don't get it. And there are a couple of factors of getting it, right? Not only do I have to have peak action, but what I'm essentially doing as well, much like what Steve does, right? I'm editing. So it's incumbent upon me to get my images out, get them out really quickly. I'm typing the caption before they go on the wire. I'm editing the photo, right? Meaning I'm usually, if I've shot it right, which hopefully I do, I'll just crop the image and do very minor adjustment to it, and it's gone. I mean, caption it and gone. I'll actually pre-caption my images, meaning oftentimes when I go to an event, I already have the caption written, much like Steve will write, probably, I'm guessing, would pre-caption. You probably pre-write some of your stuff too, right? Right. So I'll have like the city, the date, and I'll just say XXX on January 21st, 2000 at the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C., photo by, that kind of, and all the sort of stuff that has to go with it. So I'll do that so that my captioning can go as quickly as I possibly can. So,
So when you have these remote cameras in front of you, are you then choosing like
no, so the remote camera is in a fixed position, and I can't actually look at it until after the event's over. Right? So I have no idea what the hell's on there. And sometimes, like there have been sometimes when I've shot stuff and the camera went slightly out of focus. So all the images are slightly soft, meaning I throw them all away. They're no good at all. So I actually truly don't know. And then what I've done is I'm sort of a tinkerer. So bless you. So I make my own trigger. So I will separately trigger my remote camera while I'm firing my main camera. So literally, it's basically a nurse's call button, and I just wired it up. So I push the button, and it'll send a signal to a radio that I have with me, that sends a signal up to the radio that's attached to the camera, that sends a signal to the camera to fire. And the technology works. Technology works quite well. No, it's definitely absolutely. These are still images. I don't do no video for this guy, not yet.
Sorry, we're still on photography questions here.
Steve doesn't mind. He wants to learn too.
Throughout your career, when you went from analog towards digital, what's the main difference in the approach of how you did your job, analog to digital?
So that's a great question, and in fact, I'm still analog. Right? Okay. So this is I don't know if I have a picture of it, but I probably don't. So I have I just last year bought, or maybe a year and a half ago, I bought a 1948 Speed Graphic, which is a old press camera. Like when you used to see the old press guys like in the 40s and 50s, they had these big cameras, right? So I got one of those. The reason I like shooting analog is because it forces me to slow down. I mean, really slow down. And I sort of like that because digital, like when you're messing around, shooting on your phone now, right? It's like immediate, right? You can look at it and go, oh, that sucks, and delete it, or whatever. And so you can do that, and it's very immediate. There's actually a terminology for that. When digital first came out, guys would take pictures and they'd look in the back of the camera, right? Look at the screen, and they call that chimping because people would take a picture, look at it and go, ooh, ooh. like that, because they had something on there and they could see it immediately, different than analog. And so the shift from analog is, if I shot a basketball game analog, which I did lots of, I might shoot maybe 100 pictures, maybe 4 rolls of film, maybe. With a typical event now, the hockey game I just did last night, I shot 2,200 pictures with my remote camera included. So 2,200 pictures, which I wheedled down to send 40 to the wire, right? So there's a technique that I have for being able to go through those pretty quickly and get to them, but that's what went out to the wire.
So all of your pictures are of men, both athletes and fans.
Yes.
So I'm curious, did you cover any women?
I have covered.
Age
The answer is yes and yes and yes. And so, in fact, for those of you at the Washington Post, Tony Sandys is a very competent, extraordinarily talented female photographer. And so, yes, the answer is yes. And I will say honestly, at least, and you can talk about this too, but at least in my happy little world, I don't give a hoot if they're a man or a woman. I mean, it's totally irrelevant. As far as coverage goes, there are tons of women reporters. There are tons of women photographers. I would say men are more prevalent, at least in sports. I don't know about writing, but in sports photography, men are more prevalent now. As far as covering women's sports, I have, but I will also say that from a revenue standpoint, what people are most interested in are sports that are primarily dominated by men. One of the sports that I have covered extensively is the World Bobsledding Championships. So on luge and skeleton, those are very, very popular in Europe, and they're equally divided between men and women. And there is no difference. I mean, other than there's no 4-man bobsled team. There are 2s, but not 4s in women. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. You want to comment on sports writers, on women?
There are a lot of women. I would say, fortunately, in the last 7 years, women have really, really made strides in sports writing. I guess it's a tribute to the management that sees what they bring to the table. And it's if you look at the Washington Post, I would say a good half are women.
Yeah, Sally Jenkins. Sure. Was there another question? Somebody had.
Yeah, question for Steve. What guides or constrains what stories you do or what you emphasize in a story, if anything?
Well, I mean, it's really a one-size-fits-all. I mean, you're writing for the world as a wire guy, so.
The photographer had said he's confined to not doing anything negative or financially adverse to the team.
No, I'm not constrained by not doing anything negative. What I said was I try to be really respectful of their space. So I try to be. I won't purposely try to embarrass somebody. How about that?
For me, it's the same thing. I mean, I can't afford to be vindictive to somebody. I mean, I look at some of these pictures and I go, oh, terrible quote. I hate this guy. Oh, I love this guy. I mean, but you'd never know it. I mean, that's where I'm coming from, because almost every one of these pictures, I look at, Ryan Zimmerman and go, oh, he's the best quote going. He's the best. So, I mean, that's from my perspective. I think, but I won't burn a guy just because he's a jerk, because I would spend half of my time burning people, because there are a lot of jerks. One thing I did want to mention about being lucky in photography, one of the Reuters photographers was on the top of the stretch during the Preakness a couple of years ago, and one of the jockeys started falling off the horse and was literally hanging on to the neck, and it ended up winning the race. So when she came back to the tent there was like, did you get it? Did you get it? And she's going, what? I don't know what was I supposed to get? It was the most dramatic thing ever. So they developed her stuff, and she got it. So, and she won all the awards. I mean, literally national awards for the greatest picture of a jockey hanging on to the neck and ending up winning the race, and blind luck. But, she put herself in a position to be lucky. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the sports that are the best to cover and the worst as far as getting quotes. I think the NHL, I don't know what it is, but I love those guys. They, guys bleeding from the ear. He's got a black guy, lost a tooth during the game. They lost 6-1, and he'll talk as long as you want. I mean, NHL guys are phenomenal. Football and NBA are kind of in the middle. You got some good guys, you got some jerks, And for some reason, and I don't know what it is, I think baseball has more of the jerks. You wouldn't think that would be the case because, look, they play 162 games. You lose 4-1, well, it doesn't matter. You're playing a doubleheader tomorrow. But for some reason, after the game, those guys are just, they don't want to talk, or they'll give you 30 seconds. I don't know what it is, but that's pretty, that's a generalization, but most sports writers feel that way.
Have you seen a change in the last 20 years?
No.
25 years? It's been pretty
Nope. Baseball, NHL is the best. Although if you wanted to go up here, would be horse racing, and I don't know what it is. People say, well, they need to publicize their sport. I don't think that's what it is. Those guys are just the best. I mean, guy just wins the Kentucky Derby, and I'm walking along with him back to the stable, and he's giving me quotes, and I'm loving the guy, and he says, hey, let me give you my cell number. This is, anytime you want. I mean, that's like Joe DiMaggio giving me his cell number, but that is just so common. Bob Baffert. I mean, all of these guys are just tremendous. I love those horse racing guys are by far the best.
Ever interviewed John McEnroe?
Love the guy, love him because, although I didn't not after a match where he just lost, but I've done features on him. I've done, he's candid, he's open, and sometimes you have to temper what he says. You'll say, this guy's a jerk. Well, a lot of people say that about him, but I'm not gonna burn him. But he's just, for what I need, just open. Just, love that type of guy. Great quote. That's what a writer looks for, is the great quote, and McEnroe's is just golden. I am retired, although I do some things just. I don't miss it because I run quotes. I write some things like I say Seattle Times or the San Jose Mercury. So I do sometimes, but I'm very involved. I'll be at the Purdue game tomorrow for Maryland. So I mean, I don't miss it because I'm really involved. And when you're running North America with not a lot of people, I could be at an NFL game and somebody calls me and goes, one of the Vancouver Canucks was just arrested for domestic assault. And I'm Vancouver, who do I know? So it's just, that cloud off of my head is just one. I can go to the Purdue game tomorrow and not worry about anything. So, I mean, I'm still involved and I don't miss that part of it because North American editor for Reuters is extensive. It is really 24/7.
You get Hall of Fame votes?
I do not. My brother does. He gets Hall of Fame because he covers. My brother covers the Baltimore teams, so he knows those players. He knows the Orioles. He knows the Ravens. I was always on the more international. I'd go to the Olympics. I'd always go to the Super Bowl. My brother, working for AP Baltimore, would only go if the Ravens are in it. So, I mean, it's, we competed in New Orleans because the Ravens were there and I was there anyway. So, like I said, we sat next to each other and competed. But, we had different, he knows the people I don't. Some of the people, yes.
We mentioned the rise of women's sports now. Do you find a difference getting a story from women's teams than you do from getting men's teams? Or are there differences in...
Women are great, and women are just phenomenal. And I don't think it's because they have to promote their sport. They just will sit and talk, and they know our job. They have empathy, and maybe it's because they don't make $24 million a year, but they treat the press wonderfully. There is a difference. One of the best people in this area, I don't know if you remember Joe Theismann. The best quote ever. He was just, generally speaking, you go into a locker room after an NFL game and you go to the quarterback and there's a big scrum. Well, I wouldn't do that because I said, Joe Theismann will talk to anyone. He'll talk to a janitor. He's looking for people afterwards. So I would be like on the fourth go round about me and two other people there. But he was just as open. I mean, he'd look at me and go, Steve, it was like the Civil War out there. It was chaos and it was blood all around, and I put that in my story and people would go, where did you get that? How did I was there for the Theismann. He didn't say that. I said, and I said, well, I don't know. I guess you just missed it. But, a half hour after the game, when he's still talking, he gets more animated. So he was just the best. One of the guys I talked to was David Ortiz, Big Poppy. He was doing an article on another guy, and he was just the best. I mean, he talked as long as I wanted. He gave me a man hug afterwards. He called me bro. I just I got a new guy. Theismann, got a new guy, David Ortiz. So the next time they were in there, I was working a feature on somebody else. So I go, well, I know where I'm going. David Ortiz, about a month later, he goes, I knew he wouldn't remember me because, I don't cover the Red Sox, but, I figured the guy's great. So I go, hey, David, you got a minute? No, I'm not talking today. Oh, bro, wasn't interested. It was just, so, it's one of those things where some guys, some days they're great, and other days they're just, they ain't talking. Kind of like us, yeah, exactly. Good days and bad. Some of the people that I've loved, that I today consider friends, still talk to them. Apollo Ono, the speed skater. You talk to him once, and he's just like your friend for life. He's just phenomenal. I don't know if you know Dara Torres, the Olympic champion swimmer. Same thing, just I've got a friend for life. Leonard Marshall of the New York Giants. Can call him anytime. I can call him to say hello. He's not like, well, what do you need? He's like, hey, good hearing from you. So, there are some great people that I've met over the years, and they're just, some guys that are just not so good. Yes. Bill Belichick is one of those. I've been in many of his, and he's not bad. He's just so colorless. I've done many Super Bowls with him, and you just can't get him to, it's going to be a tough game, and we'll do. Yeah, we'll do the best we can. So I almost never quoted him because he wasn't worth quoting. He was terrible. He was terrible. I guess he's not a bad guy. He's an Annapolis guy. His father worked at the academy, but he's just not the bad quote.
Bill Cowher just got elected to the Hall of Fame, and Jimmy Johnson. Any opinions about either of those guys?
Jimmy Johnson, great quote. Bill Cowher, not so much. He was too intense. Yeah. Now that he's not in football, now that he's an NFL analyst, a much better quote. But before he was just too intense. Yeah, the chin. Jimmy Johnson, loved him. Great.
No. Although I will say I own a motorcycle maintenance repair shop with my youngest son and built bikes. So we used to race. We used to have flat tracks. So I've done motorcycle racing, specifically motorcycle racing, but never hung off the back of a bike. No. Yeah. I've seen that. Yeah. No. Never done that. I've done auto racing before, but also that's one where you have to really, really, really pay attention. Super pay attention, because if they go sideways, you can really get seriously hurt. So I've done a very wide range of things. If I can, I'm going to glom onto a David Ortiz story, because I have one. So even though he's his bro, so the Red Sox were playing the Orioles, and Ortiz had a terrible game, and he got called out on strikes. And he went into the dugout, and he took his bat, and he totally destroyed the dugout phone. Took his bat and just beat the hell out of it. Just knocked it off the wall, broke into a zillion pieces. So I took a couple pictures of it. The next day on the Red Sox, remember Johnny Gomes? Sure. Johnny Gomes was with the Red Sox. So as a sort of humorous thing, what the Orioles did was they strung up a can with string as the bullpen phone. So, I mean, I got a picture of Johnny Gomes like talking to the bullpen, like can on the phone. So there's some funny, there's some. So from my perspective, right, and once again, if I treat them, if I'm respectful of them and their space, and know that I'm purposely never going to try to embarrass them, because nobody wants to be embarrassed. I mean, nobody wants that, right? I'm also not going to make them look like Superman. It is what it is. But as long as you understand that there's a fair amount of humor in what we do, too. There's some funny stuff that happens. I mean, periodically, there's some very funny stuff that can happen. So the one story I will say, as far as goods and bads. So I'll agree with Steve. Hockey players, they're pretty awesome because those guys are, it's a very short tenure you have when you play a league sport, right? In hockey, what's the average tenure? Probably like 6 years, 5 years, 4 years. I mean, it's a very short tenure. So you as a kid, you work your whole life to be able to get to the NHL, and your tenure there is very, very short. So most of these guys, in my experience, have proven to be sort of, they understand they put their pants on one leg at a time, and generally speaking, are pretty good. I've had a couple where Steve said, he's been yelled at by people. I had an incident where I had a manager of Detroit Tigers, and I was actually working on a story for Sports Illustrated, and he was the story. So I was taking a lot of pictures of him. I had to take a lot of pictures of him, and he was just having a terrible time, and it just wasn't good. And he basically, in a not so nice way, basically said, "Get that freaking camera out of my face," essentially. And so okay, fine. That's, hey, I just said, look, if you don't want me to take your picture, just let me know, and I'm respectful. That's okay. I'll do that. And he's the only player I've ever had, and only professional athlete I've ever had, come back to me the next day and said, I understand you're really trying to do your job, and I'm really sorry. I really apologize. I was like, dude, bro.
I've never had that happen.
I just one time. I also had I'll tell you one other one, quick one, and then I'll turn it back over to Steve. So Lou Piniella was the manager of the Tampa Bay Rays, right? And Lou Piniella, the Tampa Bay Rays were awful. I mean, like equally bad as the Orioles were last year. I mean, they were just terrible. And so during this game, the Rays had a lead, and Lou went to his bullpen, and the bullpen immediately coughed up 6 runs, and they lost it. So I'm taking some pictures of Lou because part of what I have to do, right, is get their reaction. Action's great, reaction's better, right? I mean, reaction, I'll wait to get reaction. And so Lou, I got one of the best pictures ever because he glared right at me. And he goes, "Get that effing camera out of the effing," and every other word was F, 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 F. So Sam Palazzo was the manager of the Orioles at the time, and he and Lou played ball together. So I went, Sam. I saw him the next day. I said, "Sam, man, your boy Lou really gave it to me yesterday." He goes, "What'd he say?" So I told him. He goes, "That's nothing." So there are goods and bads, but generally speaking, my experience is a little different than Steve's because I'm not interviewing him, right? I don't need him for a quote or anything like that. And what I'm trying to do is sometimes I'll have to try to get a portrait, and literally I'll have maybe tops 20 seconds to try to get a portrait. So I've actually developed some techniques for sort of doing something that will get their attention to get them off the fact that I'm actually trying to take their portrait, right? So sometimes I'll bring out, I have this crazy lens that's got 3 big screws coming out of the front of it, and it just looks ridiculous, but it actually works pretty well. And so I'll say, "Hey, you ever seen a lens like this?" "No. What's it do?" "Stand right there. I'll show you." I'll get it. "Hey, what do you think?" "Yeah, that's pretty cool." Or this happened actually last year. I told you I had my speed graphic, so I brought my speed graphic out to the game. All right, so I could take one frame, right, one picture, and then I got to pull the film magazine out, put the dark slide in, flip it over. It's like 3 minutes between pictures. And so who was the Baby Shark guy? Para, right? Para. See, I told you I'm not a sports fan. So Para, Gerardo Para, Soto, Robles, and one other player. So Power comes over, he goes, "What is that?" I go, it's an old speaker. So he actually, this is during the game, he took my speaker and he went in the dugout pretending like he was a press photographer, like he was walking around with it, and just like the players were on the bench, they were posing and stuff like that, like he was pretending, and he had a good time. So I said, "Let me show you what it does." So I had all four of them sit on the bench. During the game, took my speed graphic, one black and white photo of them. It's a nice picture, and I got the photo. But it was just using a technique to try to get them off the fact that I'm trying to get their picture, and be respectful of them, but get them off the fact that I'm trying to take their picture to do something that's creative. The last thing I'll say is Steve was talking about, there's a big glom of people around trying to get the quote. Well, same thing happens in photography, right? Big game, there's a big glom of people that are, all. So whenever I see that big glom, I go literally in the opposite direction. I mean, I don't want the same picture as everybody else. That is counterintuitive. It's just counterproductive to me. So I will go someplace else, and I'll wait for something specific that I'm trying to get, because I never want to be in that big group scrum, because I'm just going to get the same image as everybody else. So.
Speaking of the big scrum, it's the hardest thing that I've ever done was the Olympics. What they call a rope line. It looks like a movie theater. It's a long 50 yards long, and the player of the game this was just crazy to me. Player of the game walks down, and decides at the last minute where he's going to I'm gonna stop here. And then there's a scrum, and if you need a quote, that's just it's impossible. It's just the worst situation, and that's why the Olympics. I love doing the Olympics. I did many of them, but the rope line is just the worst thing, because there's no podium. There's no the star of the game walks, and then he decides to stop right here. Maybe sees a friend or whatever, and that's where the scrum is. So that's absolutely the worst thing in the world for me. Yes?
The two players, I'm wondering if you have any impressions of. One is Michael Phelps, and the other is my guy, Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers, good quote. I mean,
Is he a nice guy?
Very nice guy. Yes. And I've done.
He does State Farm commercials.
Yeah. No, he's definitely a nice guy. Michael Phelps, one of those where I couldn't get a quote out of him. I've sat down with him. Nice guy, just wonderful guy. And I don't know if you saw the picture of advertising this thing in the online. That was me in the middle next to Phelps, in the scrum right in the middle next to him. He's a wonderful guy, but just not a very good quote. And ironically, since he's not competing anymore, my brother, because I've always told him Phelps, love the guy, worst quote ever. And my brother said, you gotta listen to this. And it was, when he showed me a tape of when he sat down with him just a couple of weeks ago, talking about one of his charities, and he was phenomenal. He was, maybe it was just the competition. Maybe when I talked to him, he was always DUI or, Olympics or whatever, the pressure. But when he was talking about his charity, I just couldn't believe that was Michael Phelps. Once again, wonderful guy. My recollection, bad quote. But I'll take the ones who talk than the ones, the Mattinglys,
Right, give you the Heisman.
Yes.
Sir, a question for both of you. Do you cover any college sports, and which college sports do you cover the most of? Football, basketball?
Well, for both. But I mean, college basketball is my favorite. I do a lot of that, much more than college football. And I always did the Final Four, and the Final Four was my favorite event of all, because, you go into the losing locker room at the championship game, and the kids would literally be crying. They would swear the sun was not going to come up tomorrow. You go into the locker room, the other locker room, they are so happy. Forget marriage, children. This is the happiest day of their life. Nothing will eclipse that. It's just raw emotion, and you don't find that in the Super Bowl. I mean, they're very, like, well, we'll get them next year, or the World Series, or even the Olympics. They're professionals, but there's nothing like college sports, to me, especially the Final Four.
So also, I'm on that page. Similar to Steve, my single favorite event to cover, bar none, is the Army-Navy game. Army-Navy, because that to me is truly the height of amateur athleticism. Right? There's a ton of pomp, a ton of circumstance. None of those players are scholarship players. They're not going to get money. The vast majority of them will never play again in the NFL or anything like that. It is truly the height of amateur athleticism, and it's got over 100-year history to this game. And so, to me, to be able to do that, and it is totally crazy. I mean, you want to talk about sort of crazy sidelines. That is totally nuts, because they there's players that have played there 50 years ago. They're standing on the sidelines. There's guys with iPhones. It is not particularly well regulated, because the academies let them in. I mean, this year Navy did the credentialing, so Navy let in whoever they wanted to let in on the sidelines. So plus the president was there this year, and that adds another layer of interest. So that game went off at 3 p.m. I was in the parking lot at 9:30 in the morning in Philadelphia. Right, and I was there that early. In fact, the media gate didn't open until 10 a.m. But with the president there, there's extra security, there's extra process and procedures. It's very crowded, so it's just, and that's part of just being prepared for doing the event. I mean, honestly, to doing the event. So that's my sort of single. That's my favorite thing. When you talk about, sort of, Steve was talking about difficult things, I covered the Preakness, and I like to describe the Preakness as, I did this, it was probably about, I did it for ESPN it's probably about eight years ago, something like that, 10 years ago. And I described it as 6 hours of preparation for 2 minutes and 30 seconds of terror. Literally, because you're setting up remote cameras, right? There's remote cameras, and so it all has to work. There's tons of remote cameras, so you have to make sure that nobody's on the same channel as you are, so they don't accidentally fire your camera. There's a whole, in fact, the Baltimore Sun, Carl Farron from the Baltimore Sun had a very old lens. It was a Nikon 200 millimeter, big 122 millimeter diameter lens, so it's like this big around to let in light f2 lens. And it had rained, and so they were trying to bring down the mud on the track, right? So they have this very heavy weight that gets pulled around by a tractor. And I was sitting there watching this thing, and I'm thinking, that weight's swinging out, swinging, and it took out a whole line of cameras that were sitting there just like, and it totally busted Carl's lens. I mean, just like broke it in half, kind of thing, like that. But that's part of. On our credentials, there's a ton of little writing on the back of it, and basically it says, basically you do this at your own risk. So, tough noogies if something happens. It's just basically you're on your own and stuff. So we all have insurance too. But that was probably, that's of all the things, that was probably the most difficult event I ever covered. Do you want to talk about it? Yeah.
One of that beautiful picture. This is just an interesting thing that I think most people aren't aware about. That's the view from the press box these days. It's terrible, Back in the day, like for the NBA, for instance, when I first started, I was on the floor, right with the players on the as good a seat as the players have. It was phenomenal. Now we are on temporary bleachers in the tunnel, in the corner of the arena. They have just changed everything. When I think it was 1992 when Camden Yards was built, beautiful press box. It's low. I've literally had my laptop broken with a foul ball. It's just a phenomenal seat. This is what we get now. The caps, the worst seat in the house. I mean, I'm not trying to boo-hoo, but it's funny the way. I'm trying to show that the way where money has come into all these sports. They say, why should we give the press a seat on the floor of an NBA game? We could sell that for $500 a game. So we're just going to put them in the corner and literally in the tunnel. I mean, I think that's interesting. That's all sports now are the worst. U.S. Open, Kentucky Derby used to be phenomenal on the finish line. Now, literally, there's nowhere for the press to watch. I mean, it's underground. You can watch it on TV unless you find. Literally, I'm not. You can watch it on TV. There's no press box with a view of the track anymore. So that's where everyone's gone. They could, they sell that Kentucky Derby, for I don't know how many hundreds of thousands to a group. So the press, it's like, once again, I'm not boo-hooing it, but it's the press has, it's different now. It's just the whole landscape is different about covering a game. Hardest things I've ever had to cover, speaking of the Preakness, it was this horse Barbaro, was supposed to win the first Triple Crown since 1978. I mean, he was the one to watch. So it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds of absolute terror, because as a wire guy, this thing has to be done. You send a bulletin who won, you send one paragraph, and then they want 300 words in the next 3.5 minutes. It's just insane. So the Barbaro race, he's supposed to win the Triple Crown. He won the Kentucky Derby. He goes off into Preakness, and out of the gate on the first turn, he pulls up lame. Oh my God! I'm covering this 2 minutes of terror, and Barbaro is limping, and the jockey jumps off trying to hold his leg so it doesn't snap in half. It was just the hardest day of my life, because not only is the Preakness terror, but having to double barrel a lead with Barbaro, you don't know what happened or how it happened or if he's okay. It was just awful. Another one, I was at the Kentucky Derby. Big Brown wins. He's supposed to win the Triple Crown. Second place is 8 Bells. Okay, I'm writing frantically, and as I'm looking at it, 8 Bells right after the race collapses. Oh my God, the 8 Bells collapsed. They euthanize her on the track. So then it's just like, oh my God, where am I going now? So that was just, just for a wire guy, I used to get so envious of the Washington Post, because they'd be like, watching a game and they'd go, I'm going to write the greatest lead ever created, and I'm on my third story by then, and they're just, they're thinking of, what they're going to lead with, and it's changed a little, because with the Post and all these papers have their online source. They're not wire writers, but they don't have that 11 o'clock deadline anymore. But it's still there. To be a wire writer is a special talent. Probably the other hard one I had was when the Giants beat the undefeated New England Patriots in the Super Bowl with less than a minute. That was just, wires got to have everything, like I said, when it's done. And something that dramatic was just, it was really, really hard to write. You ask a wire person like, hey, who you going for? They'll go, doesn't matter, I just want him to win by 40. That is just how wire people are, because it is just so harrowing to have that last second victory or loss.
So one of the things I'll talk about before we wrap up is Steve made mention of this as far as where the press is able to go and location and things like that. So one of the things that I will say is both he and I will be at the Maryland-Purdue game tomorrow. He'll be up behind me up there in the press row, which is an awesome place to sit. Pretty much, right? It's pretty good. That's a pretty good place to sit. Well, even now they'll get it. It'll be fine. And where I get put is on the floor. And at Maryland, and most of the universities are like this, and they want to monetize this as much as possible. Those courtside seats are literally like maybe 5 feet off the court, literally. And I have to put my little floor seat in front of there, scrunch my legs together, stay behind the line of the court. So I have maybe like 2.5 feet, something like that. And I've got a couple cameras with me. It's very, very tight, and it's frankly dangerous. I mean, if a lot of times you'll see a player, they'll come barreling in there. If they don't have an out lane, they basically will go into you, and it can be kind of dangerous. So it's all about the universities, in effect, trying to monetize to maximize the revenue potential for these sports, athletic sports I think. Do you agree? I mean, I think so. Football, same thing. Football is a huge business. I mean, some of these big schools, Big Ten schools and stuff, that is a huge business. Millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars and stuff. So I guess.
I've got one more thing.
Okay.
I just wanted to say one of the stories that I wrote extensively on was about football injuries, the CTE, and that just really. I mean, I watch football. I don't live for it anymore. It's because I did so many stories on that debilitating, that crippling disease that it's really. I look at football in a different way. I was doing a story on Joe DeLamalora, the Hall of Famer for the Buffalo Bills, and he told me he's starting to lose it. This was in 2014, and I just felt so, he just said, I don't know, I'm starting to forget things, and they estimated that he had taken 225,000 hits to the head since he started playing football. So, I've done a lot of stories on people that have lost it, and the NFL wasn't helping them at the time. It was really tough. A guy would tell me a story, and then 30 seconds later, tell me the same story. It was just heartbreaking. So, of all the stories that have really stuck with me, it's the CTE. I watch football games, and I watch them in a different light now. I see running back goes down, and he puts his head down to avoid the tackle, and the tackler is trying to get his legs, and they hit helmets, and there's no way to make football safer. I don't think football was designed for guys that are 6'4", 240, running a 4.8 40-yard dash. I mean, I personally don't think they can make that sport safe as they want. They tout the helmets, they tout a lot of different safety measures. They now penalize for targeting, but I just think of Joe DeLamalora and all the hits that happen on every play to the head, and it really saddens me.
Actually, I have a theory about how they can make football safer.
I got to hear this.
I did. Basically, take their helmets off, remove their helmets, and I guarantee guys won't leave with their head. And essentially make it similar to rugby. If they were to change it, if they were to structure it and change it like that, I believe football could be made safer. So,
you heard it here first.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks to our speakers. This was a fabulous program. Another round. And thanks to our sponsor, Jerry. Do come back to the museum. We have lots of programs. It is a community-based museum, and we welcome you, your children, your grandchildren, your out-of-town friends. Please come back. Thank you.